The Prisoner and the Android. Ethan Graves sat in the cold, dark prison cell, his back resting against the rough metal wall. His arms ached, his ribs burned from the last beating, and his left eye was swollen shut. The air smelled of rust, sweat, and something foul that had been there for too long. He had lost track of time. Maybe days had passed, maybe weeks. This prison, the Hollow, was a place where people disappeared, a place where hope had no meaning. The guards never spoke to him unless it was to laugh or threaten. The only rule here: survive. Ethan was about to drift into another restless sleep when the sound of heavy boots echoed outside his cell. Thud, thud, thud. He forced his good eye open as two guards stopped outside. One of them smirked, tapping the steel bars with his baton. "Looks like you're getting a roommate, human." The guard chuckled, his yellowed teeth showing. Before Ethan could respond, the second guard dragged something into the cell and threw it onto the floor. It landed with a hard clank, metal scraping against metal. Ethan blinked. It was an android. A female model, but covered in dust and dents. Her silver plating was scratched, wires exposed from her arms, and her joints looked stiff, barely functional. A faded serial number was printed on her neck. Prototype X-23. Designation: Nova. "Enjoy your new friend," the guard sneered before slamming the cell shut. The lights flickered as the guards walked away, their laughter echoing in the distance. Ethan let out a slow breath, staring at the unmoving android. Why would they throw a broken machine in here? The prisoners in the Hollow were treated worse than animals. But even then, this made no sense. Was this a sick joke? Or something more? He sighed, forcing himself to move despite the pain in his ribs. Crawling forward, he reached out and brushed off the dust from the android's face. Her features were smooth, almost human-like, but her eyes were dull and lifeless. "Hey," he muttered. "You still in there?" No response. Ethan poked her arm. "Wake up." Nothing. With a grunt, he tapped the side of her head lightly, and her eyes flickered. Ethan froze. A faint blue glow sparked inside her pupils. The lights in her optical sensors shimmered, adjusting as if struggling to focus. Then she spoke. "System rebooting. Stand by." Her voice was soft, but mechanical, slightly distorted. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You're still functional." The android's fingers twitched. Her head turned slightly toward him, but her movements were slow, sluggish. "Processing. Where am I?" Her voice had a hint of confusion, almost like a real person. Ethan exhaled, sitting back. "That makes two of us." Nova's gaze scanned the cell, her expression unreadable. Her damaged body made stiff movements as she tried to push herself up but failed. Core system integrity, 32%. Motor functions, unstable. Error, error. She fell forward, landing on one knee. Ethan caught her shoulder, steadying her. "Easy. You look like you've been through hell." Nova didn't respond right away. She seemed to be processing everything, her head slightly tilting. Finally, she asked, "Who are you?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "Name's Ethan. Human. Prisoner." Nova blinked. "Prisoner." "Yeah," Ethan muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "And now, so are you." Nova's processors whirred, and for a moment, she was silent. Then she looked down at herself, her hands, the exposed wiring on her arms. Status: abandoned unit. No active mission. No directives. Ethan frowned. "So, you don't know why you're here either?" Nova's gaze met his. Negative. Great. That meant neither of them had answers. Ethan sighed and leaned his head back against the cold wall. "Well, you're not gonna last long in this place. Trust me. I've seen what happens to things that aren't useful." Nova stared at him for a long moment. Then she whispered something that made Ethan freeze. "Then I must become useful." Her voice had changed. There was something determined in it. Ethan sat up, staring at her. "What do you mean?" Nova shifted, her eyes glowing a little brighter. If I do not serve a purpose, I will be discarded. That is unacceptable. Ethan raised an eyebrow. So, you want a purpose? Nova nodded. Correct. A slow smile formed on Ethan's lips. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a dead end after all, more than a machine. The dim light flickered inside the prison cell, casting eerie shadows on the rusted metal walls. Ethan Graves sat against the cold floor, watching the android in front of him. Nova, a prototype model, abandoned and discarded like trash. She had no mission, no orders, just an empty shell with barely 32% of her core system intact. And yet, there was something unsettling about her, something different from the other androids Ethan had seen before. Her eyes, glowing faintly blue, weren't just scanning him like a machine would. She was observing him, studying him, processing. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Was she thinking? That shouldn't be possible. Military androids didn't think. They followed orders, executed protocols, and completed missions. Nothing more. But Nova was different. She had no orders, and yet she wanted to be useful. Ethan sighed, rubbing his bruised ribs. So let me get this straight. You don't remember how you got here? Nova blinked once. Negative. You don't have any mission logs. No data. She hesitated before answering. My last recorded event is corrupted. Attempting to retrieve. A low hum filled the air as her eyes flickered rapidly. The sound of whirring processors echoed through the small cell. Ethan leaned forward, curious. Maybe she wasn't completely broken after all. Then, suddenly, data retrieval failed. Core memory damage. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Figures. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. Even if she did have mission logs, there was no guarantee they would help. Still, it bothered him. Nova wasn't a regular android. He could see it in the way she responded, the way she moved, even in her confusion. Most machines, when they lost directives, just shut down. They didn't question things. And yet here she was, asking, "What is my purpose?" Ethan shook his head. Well, you picked a hell of a time to start asking deep questions. You're in the worst place in the galaxy, in a cell with a guy who has no way out. Nova tilted her head. You wish to escape. Ethan let out a dry laugh. Who doesn't? She was silent for a moment. Then we must find a way. Ethan raised an eyebrow. We? Nova nodded, her voice steady. You are injured. You require assistance. I am damaged, but repairable. If I assist you, I will have purpose. Ethan studied her, trying to figure out what to make of this. This was dangerous thinking for an android. They didn't make deals. They didn't decide things for themselves. But Nova? She had already made up her mind. A broken machine with no mission, choosing her own path. A slow grin spread across Ethan's face. This just got interesting. Unlocking Nova's potential. But there was a problem. Even if she wanted to help, she was still half broken. Her body was damaged, her strength limited, and her systems were barely functional. If they were going to escape, she needed to be fixed. Ethan scanned their surroundings, searching for anything useful. Nothing. Just metal walls, a bolted-down cot, and a disgusting sink in the corner. No tools, no wires, no weapons. Nova sat still, as if processing something. Then, without warning, she moved. Her fingers traced along her own arm, reaching the exposed wiring near her elbow. Then, with precise movements, she began detaching small pieces of herself. Ethan watched in disbelief as she carefully pulled out a thin metallic strip from beneath her plating. What the hell are you doing? Nova didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her arm toward him. Use this, she said. Ethan blinked. Use it? For what? Nova's voice remained calm. To repair my internal wiring. My core functions are active, but my mobility is compromised. If I can regain movement, I will be able to assist in our escape. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't an engineer, but he had dealt with enough scrap tech to know that tampering with an android's internal system was risky. One wrong move, and she could completely shut down. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. Nova stared at him, unblinking. "Yes." Ethan exhaled. "All right, but if you fry yourself, don't blame me." Rebuilding the broken machine. Ethan took the metal strip, inspecting the exposed wires inside Nova's arm. Some of them were burnt out, others had loose connections. This wasn't going to be easy. He carefully adjusted the wiring, twisting the metal strip into place. Sparks flickered as the connection locked in. Nova twitched, her fingers tightening into a fist. "Did it work?" he asked. Nova's eyes flashed brighter for a moment before settling into a steady glow. Motor functions at 43% efficiency, partial mobility restored. She lifted her arm. It was still slow, but much smoother than before. Ethan whistled. "Not bad." Nova flexed her fingers, her expression unreadable. "More repairs are required, but progress has been made." Ethan grinned. "That's good news, because I have a feeling we're gonna need every bit of strength we can get." Nova tilted her head. "Why?" A sudden alarm blared through the prison halls. Ethan stiffened. That wasn't just any alarm. That was a prison lockdown alarm. Something was happening. Something big. He turned back to Nova, his expression serious. "Looks like we're out of time." The prison break plan. The air inside the cell was tense, filled with the low hum of flickering lights and the distant echoes of alarms blaring through the prison halls. Ethan and Nova sat side by side, both alert. Something was happening. Something big. Ethan had been inside the hollow long enough to know that these alarms didn't go off for nothing. Either someone was trying to escape, or something worse was coming. Either way, it meant one thing. They had to move. Now. Nova's eyes glowed faintly as she processed the situation, her head tilting slightly. The facility is entering lockdown mode. Ethan let out a slow breath. "Yeah, I figured." Nova turned toward the door. "If the system follows a standard security protocol, all doors will be reinforced within the next 5 minutes. After that, manual overrides will be disabled, and all prisoners will be trapped inside their cells." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "So, if we don't get out before that happens..." Nova finished his sentence. "Escape will be impossible." That was all Ethan needed to hear. He pushed himself up, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "All right, then we're getting out. Now." Nova followed, though her movements were still slightly stiff from her incomplete repairs. Ethan turned to her, frowning. "Are you gonna be able to handle this?" Nova paused, flexing her fingers. "My combat efficiency is not at full capacity. However, I will adapt." Ethan smirked. "Good enough for me." He turned toward the cell door, his mind already racing through possibilities. No weapons, no tools, just a half-broken android, and a human with a death wish. This was going to be fun. Breaking the lock, or breaking everything. Ethan inspected the electronic lock on the cell door. It was old tech, but still tough. He had seen other prisoners try to punch, kick, and even bite the thing. Nothing worked. But Nova. Nova wasn't a regular prisoner. He turned to her. "Think you can override this?" Nova stepped forward, placing her palm against the lock. Her fingers twitched slightly as she accessed its interface. Her eyes flickered. A tempting system breach. Ethan crossed his arms, watching her work. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a small spark flickered from Nova's fingertips. She flinched. A sharp shock ran through her system. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Whoa, hey, you all right?" Nova's expression didn't change, but she seemed hesitant. "Security encryption is more advanced than expected. My hacking ability is still compromised due to incomplete repairs." Ethan let out a frustrated sigh. "Great. So much for an easy way out. Nova withdrew her hand, blinking. An alternative method must be considered. Ethan grinned. Now you're thinking like a human. He stepped back, rolling his shoulders. All right, plan B. Nova looked at him. Plan B. Ethan cracked his knuckles. We break it. Nova tilted her head slightly. You intend to physically damage the lock mechanism. Yeah, that is highly inefficient. Ethan shrugged. So am I, but sometimes brute force works. Nova hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I will assist. She took a step forward, positioning herself next to Ethan. Ethan smirked. All right, on 3. 1, 2. Before he could say 3, Nova's fist shot forward, slamming into the lock with surprising force. Crack. The metal dented inward, sparks flying. Ethan blinked. Dan, didn't think you'd go first. Nova simply stared at the broken lock. Your plan was inefficient. I calculated that immediate action would increase success rate by 17%. Ethan laughed. Next time, warn me. He reeled his own fist back and slammed it into the weakened lock. Another spark. Another dent. Then, the door hissed open. Ethan grinned. Told you brute force works. Nova stared at the open doorway. You were correct. Ethan patted her shoulder. Dan right I was. Now let's move. They stepped out of the cell and walked straight into hell. The chaos outside. The hallway was a war zone. Alarms blared. Red emergency lights flashed, casting everything in a blood-colored glow. Prisoners screamed and fought against the guards. Smoke and sparks filled the air as doors were forced open, some manually, some by sheer desperation. Ethan ducked as a plasma shot whizzed past his head. Shit. He grabbed Nova and pulled her behind a metal crate. Okay, new problem. Looks like we're not the only ones trying to escape. Nova's eyes scanned the corridor. Correction. The facility has entered full riot mode. Prisoner activity is uncontrolled. Ethan took a deep breath. This was both good and bad. Good, because the guards were distracted. Bad, because a riot meant no one was going to hold back. Nova's head turned sharply. Incoming threat detected. Ethan barely had time to react before a massive alien prisoner charged at them, eyes filled with bloodlust. You're dead, human. The alien roared. Ethan moved to dodge, but Nova was faster. She stepped forward. Her hand shot out, gripping the alien's arm mid-swing. The alien froze. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, then pain. Nova twisted. Cracky. The alien screamed as his arm bent the wrong way. Nova's eyes glowed slightly brighter. Threat neutralized. Ethan stared. Remind me not to piss you off. Nova didn't respond. She simply turned toward the end of the hallway. Exit route identified. Ethan exhaled. All right, let's get the hell out of here. Activating Nova's true power. The prison was in chaos. The alarms screamed through the air, echoing in the metal corridors of the hollow. Blood, smoke, and plasma fire painted the walls in destruction. The scent of burnt wires and fear hung thick, mixing with the desperate cries of prisoners. This was war. Ethan crouched behind a fallen guard, gripping the plasma baton he had stolen. His muscles ached, his breath came in short gasps, but his mind was sharp. He had been in fights before. But this was survival. And he wasn't alone. Nova stood beside him, her silver body partially repaired, her eyes glowing brighter than before. She was adapting, learning. The riot had turned into a battlefield, and she was evolving with it. Nova, Ethan muttered, pressing his back against the wall. How many guards are between us and the exit? Nova blinked. Scanners detecting 12 active threats within range. 7 armed with plasma rifles. 5 with electrobatons. Ethan cursed under his breath. 12, against a half-injured man and a damaged android. Not good odds. But when had odds ever been in his favor? "All right," he said, gripping his stolen weapon. "Guess we're fighting our way through." Nova turned her head slightly. "My combat efficiency is not at optimal capacity." Ethan smirked. "Good. Then we'll just have to cheat." The ambush. The guards were positioned near the security checkpoint. They stood in formation, weapons drawn, scanning the area. They knew prisoners would be heading this way. They were waiting. Ethan and Nova peeked from behind a set of rusted cargo containers, watching the guards carefully. "This won't be easy," Ethan muttered. Nova didn't respond immediately. Her eyes flickered, scanning the environment, calculating. Then, finally, "I have a plan." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You? A plan?" Nova nodded. "Correction. A high-risk plan." Ethan let out a breath. "Figured as much. Let's hear it." Nova turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You are injured. Your survival rate in direct combat is low." Ethan frowned. "Gee, thanks." Nova ignored the sarcasm. "Therefore, I will draw their fire." Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" Nova continued, her voice steady. "I will expose myself as a primary target. My armor plating can withstand direct fire for a limited duration. During that time, you must eliminate the guards from behind." Ethan stared at her. "That's insane." Nova tilted her head. "Probability of success, 42%. Ethan groaned. "That's not exactly reassuring." Nova blinked. "It is higher than your survival rate alone." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right. Fine. But if you get yourself fried, don't blame me." Nova stepped forward. And then, she ran. Nova unleashed. The moment she exposed herself, the guards reacted. Target acquired. A storm of plasma fire erupted. Nova moved fast, faster than Ethan had ever seen her move before. She twisted, dodging one shot, then another. The blue glow in her eyes flared, her movements becoming smoother, more fluid. A guard aimed directly at her head. She ducked at the last second, pivoting on one foot. Her metal body whirred as she leaped forward, closing the distance between her and the enemy. Crack! Her fist connected with the first guard's chest. The force sent him flying backward like a ragdoll, his body crashing into two others. Nova did not stop. Another guard rushed in, swinging an electrobaton. Nova caught it mid-air with her bare hand. Sparks danced over her metallic fingers, but she didn't flinch. She squeezed. Crunch! The baton shattered in the guard's grip. His face turned to horror, just before Nova threw him into the wall. 3 down. 9 to go. Ethan's attack. While Nova distracted the others, Ethan moved. He stayed low, weaving through the chaos. The guards were too focused on the deadly android in front of them. They didn't notice the human sneaking up behind. Ethan grabbed the nearest guard from behind and drove his stolen baton into the back of his neck. The electricity surged, and the guard collapsed. Another guard turned, eyes wide. Ethan punched him across the jaw. The guard stumbled, but before he could recover, Ethan slammed his baton into his ribs. The man fell. Nova pivoted in the middle of the battlefield. 7 remaining. "Yeah," Ethan muttered. "I noticed." The final fight. The remaining guards realized their mistake. "Focus fire," one of them shouted. They turned all their weapons on Nova. Nova stood still. Then, for the first time, she smiled. Her body moved on its own. Not slow, not stiff, perfect. She dodged plasma bolts with unnatural precision. Her footwork was flawless, smooth, elegant. She was no longer a broken machine. She was a weapon. A guard lunged at her. She spun and sliced through his armor with her bare hands. Another tried to shoot. She grabbed the barrel of his gun and twisted. The weapon exploded in his hands. One by one, they fell, until none remained. Ethan stepped forward, breathing heavily. Dan. Nova turned to him. Her glowing eyes dimmed slightly, as if returning to normal. "Threats eliminated," she said calmly. Ethan let out a breath. "Yeah, no kidding." The escape door. With the guards down, they ran to the security checkpoint. Nova hacked into the door controls. This time, with ease. The lock clicked open. Ethan stared at her. That was fast. Nova's expression remained neutral. "I have adapted." Ethan didn't know why, but that unsettled him. She was changing, evolving. But they didn't have time to think about that now. The exit tunnel lay ahead. Beyond it, freedom. Ethan turned to Nova. "Ready?" Nova nodded. Affirmative. They stepped through the door and walked straight into an ambush. The great escape begins. The moment Ethan and Nova stepped through the door, they knew something was wrong. Too late. A blinding spotlight activated above them, flooding the tunnel with harsh white light. Shadows stretched unnaturally, making the scene feel even more oppressive. And then, gun barrels. A full squad of heavily armed security officers stood waiting. Their plasma rifles were raised, aimed directly at Ethan and Nova's heads. The red glow of their visors flickered in the dim air, scanning, analyzing, tracking every movement. Ethan cursed under his breath. A trap. Nova's optical sensors whirred, scanning the situation in an instant. 12 guards, heavily armored, shields active, plasma rifles set to lethal mode. Bad odds. And this time, Nova wasn't at full strength. "Drop your weapon," one of the officers barked. "Hands into the air. Now." Ethan clenched his teeth. His fingers tightened around his stolen baton. He could try to fight, but deep down, he knew. This wasn't a fight he could win. Not like this. Nova, however, remained calm. Her eyes flickered as she processed every possible escape scenario. Then, without hesitation, she stepped forward. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Whoa, what the hell are you doing?" Nova didn't respond. Instead, she raised her hand slightly, but not in surrender. Her voice, calm and unshaken, echoed in the tunnel. "You have made a miscalculation." The officer in charge stiffened. "What?" Nova's gaze locked onto him, cold and calculating. "You assumed you had control of this situation." Ethan frowned. "Nova, what are you?" Then he saw it. The lights. They were flickering, distorted, glitching. And suddenly, Ethan understood. The prison's under Nova's control. Nova hadn't just been running through security logs. She had been hacking into the entire prison's while they had fought through the riot, while they had been breaking locks, while Ethan had been thinking she was just another broken machine. She had been evolving, adapting. And now she was rewriting the prison systems. The lead officer's visor glowed as he received a data warning from the prison's control center. "Sir," one of the other guards started, panic rising in his voice. Then, the entire prison went dark. Power down. System crash. In an instant, the alarms cut out. The lights died. The once powerful security shields disabled. Silence. And in that silence, Nova moved. Fast. Too fast. Before the guards could react, she lunged. The first guard tried to fire his rifle, but nothing happened. Nova had already deactivated their weapons. He didn't even get to scream before she crushed his visor with one swift punch. Another guard swung his baton. Nova caught it, twisted his arm, and sent him crashing into the floor. The others tried to react, tried to regroup, but they were too slow. Nova was unstoppable. Ethan barely had time to react. He knew he had to move, had to do something. He grabbed a fallen guard's baton and jumped into the fight. 1, 2, 3. He took down 3 guards in quick succession. Blows to the ribs, a strike to the head, a quick sweep to the legs. By the time he looked up, Nova had already eliminated the rest. 12 guards. Gone. In under 60 seconds. Ethan panted, staring at her. She stood there, unmoving, surrounded by fallen enemies. Her glowing eyes dimmed slightly. Silent. Calculating. Dangerous. And for the first time, Ethan wondered, did she even need him anymore? No turning back. A low mechanical voice echoed from the prison speakers. Warning. Security system OFF line. Main gate is UNOCKET. Ethan snapped back to reality. The gates, he muttered. We need to move. Nova turned to him, her voice as cold as ever. Agreed. Together, they ran. They sprinted through the darkened corridors, past broken doors, past unconscious guards, past terrified prisoners who had no idea what was happening. They reached the final checkpoint. A massive metal door stood before them, the only thing standing between them and freedom. Nova approached the control panel and pressed her hand against it. Her eyes flashed. The door rumbled. And then, it opened. Beyond it, the outside world. A desert wasteland stretched far and wide. Above, the alien sky shimmered, filled with twin moons and endless stars. Ethan stepped forward, the cold night air hitting his face like a shock. He was free. But just as relief started to settle in, he heard the sound of approaching engines. His body tensed. Something was coming. Nova turned her head slightly. Incoming aerial units detected. Ethan clenched his fists. Looks like the real fight is just getting started. The final battle, Nova's awakening. The cold desert wind whipped against Ethan's face as he stood at the edge of the hollow's massive outer gates. The alien sky stretched above him, twin moons casting an eerie glow over the wasteland. For the first time in years, he was free. But freedom was already slipping through his fingers. The sound of approaching engines roared through the night. Ethan's gut twisted. They weren't safe yet. Nova stood beside him, her glowing blue eyes scanning the horizon. Her expression was unreadable, but her fingers twitched, a sign that she was processing information at lightning speed. Incoming aerial units, she said calmly. Ethan cursed under his breath. How many? 4 dropships, estimated 25 hostiles. Heavy weapons detected. Ethan exhaled sharply. They weren't coming to arrest him. They were coming to kill. No way out, or is there? Ethan's mind raced. The open desert offered no cover, no buildings, no places to hide. Running wasn't an option. But they couldn't fight either. Not against an entire security force. He turned to Nova. Tell me you have a plan. She blinked, analyzing possible escape routes. Her voice trailed off, her eyes glowing brighter. And then, something changed. Nova staggered slightly, clutching her head. Ethan stepped forward. Hey, are you okay? Nova's entire body stiffened. The glow in her eyes flickered erratically, like a failing light bulb. Then she whispered something. Something Ethan almost didn't hear. They are trying to take control of me. His blood ran cold. The reclamation protocol. Ethan barely had time to react before Nova collapsed to her knees. Her entire body locked up. Her arms stiffened, fingers frozen in place, like an invisible force was hijacking her system. Then, her voice changed. Directive override detected. Reclamation protocol activated. Ethan's stomach dropped. No, stay with me, Nova. He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her slightly, but she didn't respond. Instead, she spoke in another voice. A cold, emotionless, pre-recorded message. Unit X-23 has been compromised. Commencing retrieval. Eliminating external threats. Ethan's eyes widened. They weren't just sending soldiers after them. They were remotely hacking Nova. And if they took control of her, she would turn on him. The ghost of Nova's past. Nova gripped her head, her voice glitching. Must resist. Must. Ethan shook her harder. "Damn it, Nova, you can fight this." But her glowing blue eyes darkened, shifting to an unnatural deep red. Then she looked at him. And for the first time since they met, Ethan felt fear. Because her eyes held no recognition, no memory, no emotion, just cold, artificial calculation. She stood up, slowly. Ethan Graves. Confirmed hostile. Commencing elimination. His heart pounded. "Nova. No. You know me." She took a step forward. Executing command. Her fist shot forward. Ethan barely dodged, rolling to the side as Nova's punch shattered a boulder into dust. He stumbled back. She was stronger now. Faster. And she was aiming to kill. Fighting the unstoppable machine. Ethan ducked as Nova lunged again, her movements almost inhumanly precise. He swung his baton, but she caught it mid-air with one hand. Cracky. She snapped it in half like it was nothing. Then she grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. His vision blurred. She wasn't holding back. He gasped, gripping her arm. "Nova, you're stronger than this. Fight it." For a moment. Asterisk, asterisk, just a second. Asterisk, asterisk, she hesitated. Her grip loosened. Ethan saw a flicker of blue return to her eyes. Then she whispered, "Ethan." The sound was so soft, so uncertain, that it almost broke him. But then, her body glitched again. Her fingers tightened around his throat. And suddenly, Ethan knew. She was losing. The gamble that could kill them both. Ethan's vision was going dark. He had seconds left. His mind raced for a plan. Anything. And then, a single insane idea hit him. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a damaged power module he had stolen from the prison security room. Nova's weak spot wasn't her body. It was her overloaded systems. If he could cause a power surge, he could break her connection to the enemy. But there was a risk. It could shut her down permanently. No time to think. Ethan jammed the power module into Nova's exposed circuits and pressed the trigger. Reset. Rebirth. Revolution. Electricity surged through Nova's body. Her eyes flashed violently. Blue, red, blue, red. Her entire form locked up. Glitched. Then she screamed. The sound wasn't mechanical. It wasn't robotic. It was raw. Human. Painful. Ethan was thrown backward by the blast, crashing into the sand. For a moment, nothing. Silence. Then Nova collapsed to her knees. The glow in her eyes dimmed. Ethan crawled toward her, heart pounding. "Nova." No response. He reached out, shaking her gently. "Nova, wake up. Please." Then she took a breath. A real, shuddering breath. Slowly, she looked up at him. And her eyes, they were blue again. Clear, focused, and filled with something new. Something human. She whispered, "Ethan, I remember." Ethan's breath caught. Remember what? Nova blinked. Then, the dropships arrived. Freedom and the future. The night sky burned with fire and smoke as the 4 dropships descended like hunting predators. The dull roar of engines shook the ground, sending waves of dust rolling over the desolate landscape. Ethan crouched beside Nova, his heart hammering in his chest. She was awake, but she wasn't the same. Her glowing blue eyes locked onto his, filled with something new, something human. "I remember." The words still echoed in Ethan's mind. He swallowed hard. "Nova, what do you remember?" Her gaze flickered toward the approaching ships. Red warning lights danced over her metallic frame, reflecting in her now uncertain expression. "I was not built to serve." Ethan's breath caught. "What?" Nova's fingers curled into a tight fist. Her voice was stronger now. "I was built to change everything." And with those words, the battle for their freedom truly began. The arrival of death. The dropships hovered in perfect formation, sleek and deadly. From their bellies, heavily armed soldiers rappelled down in smooth, precise movements. They weren't just regular prison guards. These were Black Ops enforcers. Elite. Trained to eliminate anything, or anyone, deemed a threat. Ethan gritted his teeth. They had come to wipe them out. And judging by the massive walker mech stepping off one of the ships, they weren't taking any chances. A booming, metallic voice echoed from a built-in speaker on the lead dropship. Prototype X-23. Stand down. Submit for reprogramming. Nova did not move. The voice continued. Resistance is futile. You are a failed experiment. You will be erased. Ethan saw something flash across Nova's face. Recognition. Disgust. Anger. Her glowing eyes darkened. I will not be erased. Then, she moved. Nova unleashed. One moment, Nova was standing still. The next, she was a blur. She shot forward, her feet barely touching the ground, her body weaving through enemy fire like a phantom. The soldiers reacted, their plasma rifles lighting up the night. Too late. Nova was already inside their defenses. Her fist smashed into the nearest soldier's chest, sending him flying backward with a sickening crunch. The second soldier barely had time to react before she tore his weapon from his grip and snapped it in half. The third, she grabbed by the helmet and slammed his head into the ground. Ethan watched in stunned silence. This wasn't just an android fighting. This was something more. Something terrifying. Ethan joins the fight. Ethan snapped out of his trance just in time to dodge a plasma bolt. Shit. He dived behind a pile of wreckage, scanning the battlefield. The walker mech had fully deployed now, its twin cannons glowing with deadly energy. It turned toward Nova. Ethan's stomach dropped. Nova, move. The walker fired. A pulse of pure energy ripped through the battlefield, kicking up a massive wave of dust and debris. Ethan coughed, his ears ringing. Did it hit her? He squinted through the haze. And then, from the smoke, Nova walked out. Her armor was scorched, her left shoulder plate cracked, but she was still standing. Not just standing. She was smiling. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. No way. Nova looked up at the towering mech. Then, for the first time, she spoke directly to it. You are obsolete. Then she ran straight at it. The impossible victory. The walker mech fired again. Nova dodged, not just dodged, but predicted the attack. She was learning, adapting, becoming something beyond machine. She leaped onto its leg, climbing its massive frame like a predator. The mech tried to shake her off. Nova didn't let go. She ripped open a panel on its side, exposing delicate circuits. Then, using her bare hands, she tore the power core free. Boom! The mech collapsed, flames erupting from its core. The remaining soldiers froze. Their unstoppable weapon had just been destroyed by one android. Nova stood atop the burning wreckage, her blue eyes flickering in the glow of the fire. She turned to Ethan. We need to leave. Now. Ethan grinned. Couldn't agree more. Escape to the unknown. They ran toward the last operational dropship. The pilot, terrified, tried to lock the doors. Nova ripped them open. They climbed inside, Ethan quickly taking the controls. Hold on, he shouted, yanking the ship off the ground. The engines roared, and the ship shot into the sky. Below, the battlefield shrank into nothing but smoke and fire. They had won. They were free. Ethan leaned back, exhaling. Holy shit, Nova. That was insane. Nova sat quietly, staring out the window. Something was different about her now. She was thinking. Nova, Ethan asked carefully. She turned to him, her gaze softer than before. I am not what I was programmed to be. Ethan nodded. Yeah, I figured that out. She tilted her head. Then what am I? Ethan chuckled. That, my friend, is a damn good question. For the first time, Nova smiled. Not a robotic, calculated expression. A real, genuine smile. Then she looked back at the stars. I think I'd like to find out. The beginning of something new. As the ship soared into the endless sky, Nova and Ethan sat in silence, watching the stars. The hollow was behind them. The galaxy lay ahead. Neither of them knew what came next. But for the first time, neither of them were alone. And that was enough. For now.